I'm Dr. Sabrina Siegel with the Neuroscience Education Institute, and twice a month I sit down with a renowned mental health care expert to discuss breakthroughs and best practices for treating patients with mental illness. In this episode of the NEI podcast, we are interviewing Lisa Arrington, who is managing editor of CNS Spectrums at Cambridge University Press. This is part of our professional development track, and in this episode, we will be discussing the entire process of publishing. Welcome, Lisa Arrington.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Lisa, how would you describe the mission of the journal CNS Spectrums? What is the scope and the focus of the content that this journal strives for?
Well, CNS Spectrums covers every aspect of neuropsychopharmacology, neurotherapeutics, and the clinical neurosciences. And the topics are particularly relevant to researchers, practicing clinicians, and clinical investigators. We address new therapeutics in all types of psychiatry, and we focus on first-in-man studies, translational basic neuroscience studies, and proof-of-concept studies.
Excellent. What are some of the most common mistakes that authors make when submitting their works to CNS Spectrums?
Well, authors sometimes fail to familiarize themselves with the standard content of the journal. And this may seem obvious, but authors should read articles in more than one issue so that they have a good understanding of the journal's usual material. Also, sometimes they don't check their papers to ensure that they are formatted properly prior to submission. Although their material may be very well written, sometimes they don't check the appropriate material of subject matter or manuscript types that we would consider for publication before they submit their work. Authors should read the CNS Spectrum's instructions on the Cambridge Core website carefully ahead of time. And they need to make sure that their documents include the required number of items for each manuscript type. For example, the abstract word count requirements may differ between manuscript types, and so authors should check these in the author instructions ahead of time. For example, we need the author's academic affiliations to be included on the MS Word title page, as well as all co-authors' disclosures based on the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors requirements, or the ICMJE requirements. Authors should also make sure that the references in the reference list are listed in AMA format, not in alphabetical order. Now, these may seem like really small items, but if these are left out or done incorrectly, it can really hold up the entire process.
Wow, that was excellent information. Thank you for sharing that with us. What are some specific challenges that authors face during the submission process?
Well, sometimes authors have questions about how to navigate the journal submission and peer review systems effectively, such as Scholar One or Manuscript Central. Scholar One is the website for CNS Spectrums. On any Scholar One webpage, authors can always click the instructions and forms link in the upper right-hand side for submission information. Scholar One customer service representatives are extremely knowledgeable and helpful, and they can walk authors through the submission process over the phone if it helps.
Excellent. That's great information. What are some practices that could help increase efficiency in the submission process and just ensure a smooth submission overall?
Again, I can't overemphasize the importance of reading the author guidelines for the journal prior to submission. In addition, if authors are interested in submitting to CNS but aren't sure if we would consider the material, even if they don't have a completed abstract, they can always send us a 2 to 4 sentence synopsis of their article. At that point, if we want to see the full-length manuscript, or if we want them to submit it but have ideas about the appropriate manuscript type for their submission, we can let them know before they submit their work online. Submitting authors can also reach out to me via email specifically if they have editorial questions before they submit their work. We especially encourage the publication of original research, both by seasoned investigators and also by up-and-coming investigators who are often mentored by senior investigators. Also, if a corresponding author has fellow co-authors working on the manuscript, that person should make sure that those co-authors can be contacted within 24 to 48 hours at the most. Toward the end of the process, prior to publication, not being able to contact a co-author for information can significantly delay the publication of a manuscript or even an entire issue if the paper is part of a special thematic issue.
Wow. What are some tips that you could offer that would allow authors' submissions to stand out?
So authors should make sure to include a tightly written, concise, and strong abstract that really reflects what their research is about. And they should also include well-drawn graphics that support the topic of their submission. Of course, we do look at review articles, but we also are looking for high-impact research. Also, authors should remember to carefully consider the intended audience. They should keep in mind that the journal goes out to researchers and practicing clinicians.
Is there any advice that you would have for less experienced authors?
Well, first of all, submitting authors should familiarize themselves with what's published in the journal regularly. Also, regarding the peer review process, no one gets accepted in the first round. Even if you're invited, your paper will still be put through peer review.
What are some resources that you recommend or tools for future development that could help increase authors' success with publication or just writing in general?
Well, if authors visit CNS Spectrums online and they refer to our instructions for contributors, they'll see a section that addresses the language editing services that we provide. And this is something that Cambridge is offering in partnership with the American Journal Experts. They're a leading provider of author services for researchers, and their services include language editing, translation, and figure preparation. To be clear, using the service will ensure that the English language in the article is not a barrier to publication. However, the article will still be subject to the same submission, selection, and peer review process once the author submits it to a journal. The service does not in any way guarantee publication.
Right. But that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Could you share your unique perspective as managing editor on the writing and publishing process?
Sure. Well, it's all of the things that I've mentioned previously. Authors really do need to keep all of those things in mind. Sometimes authors think that their work is done right after the paper is accepted, but this isn't the case. Authors should expect to receive first proofs prior to publication with the inclusion of author queries from the typesetters. Once the submitting and/or corresponding authors receive the proof, the faster that they send their responses to the author queries back to our production group, the sooner we can prepare their accepted manuscript for publication. Also, authors should be aware of the process in its entirety. Sometimes authors think that their work is done once the paper is accepted, but this isn't the case. Authors should expect to receive first proofs prior to publication with the inclusion of author queries from the typesetters. Once the submitting and/or corresponding author receives the proof, the faster that they send their responses to author queries back to our production group, the sooner we can prepare their accepted manuscript for publication. Also, if tables or figures are submitted with the manuscript, authors should submit well-drawn graphics, which are done to the specifications of the journal rather than submitting graphics with low resolutions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing such great information with us. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast was brought to you by NEI membership. You're busy caring for your patients, and you might not have time to keep up with the ever-changing treatments in mental health care. You don't have to. NEI membership includes regular psychiatric news updates, CME activities on the hottest topics, and the most cutting-edge prescribing app available today. To learn more, visit the link provided in the podcast description.